The media and Trump had a weird codependent relationship.
Totally.
Just in terms of trying to appeal to people out there who may not be Trump fans, or to get through to them on this point, it just seems to me that when you lose an election, anytime you lose an election as a party, you need to analyze what went wrong. And especially when the candidate is a complete political novice with no prior experience and had so many attributes that historically were considered extreme negatives. And it seems to me that if you're just to look at what happened in 2016, Trump was able to ride a few key issues all the way to the White House. One was these, foreign wars, these interventions that we've had in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, that were disasters. We hadn't gotten out of Afghanistan yet, but it was on its way to being a historic 20-year failure. He shattered the Republican Party with that message, no more Bushes. He then took the issue of trade and basically broke down the Democrats' blue wall in the Rust Belt by basically pointing out the ways that our bipartisan trade policy, just like our bipartisan our war policy, had led to the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt. And then he also used the issue of immigration, which was sort of closely related to that idea of creating wage pressure on the working class. So you would think that having rode those issues all the way to the White House, that there would be some sort of reappraisal. And instead, it seems like what the elite did to protect itself was create these mythologies that Trump somehow got elected, not because the people of the country were fed up with the way that it had been run for 20 years by both parties, but rather because the Russians somehow were behind it, or the country was shot through with white supremacy and that somehow explained it. And so we never really got a true sort of accounting or reappraisal of what Trump's election meant. And instead, the media turned to like this hysteria, this mode that we're not even out of yet. Your reactions to that?
No, I think, it's one of the most amazing things about the 2016 election, which is, first of all, in a lot of ways, Barack Obama, being this kind of once-in-a-generation political talent, papered over the incredibly serious systemic problems the Democrats had, even while he was being reelected. Underneath Obama and all his glitter and glamour, the Democratic Party was collapsing. They were losing state houses and congressional seats and governorships all over the country. And the reason for that is the growing anger with the neoliberal policies that the Democratic Party in the early 1990s had decided to embrace in lieu of the working class politics for which they had always been known. The kind of Clintoniite pronouncement that the Democratic Party needs to start embracing corporate America instead of unions, that it needs to move much closer to this politics that says, we're going to encourage corporate America, we're going to embrace the Pentagon and all of that. And it radically changed the Democratic Party into this party of technocracy and the elites, culminating with the Obama presidency. And what is amazing is in 2016, the Democrats lost the White House to a game show host. And so you would think they would wonder why that happened, as you were saying, right? You would think they would wonder, what is it about us that caused us to lose to Donald Trump? And instead, they invented this long list of people that they decided were to blame instead. Vladimir Putin, principally, WikiLeaks, Jill Stein for having the audacity to continue to run for president. A whole long list of villains, essentially everybody except themselves and the people who are responsible for it. And I think the most toxic narrative is the one that said the only reason Trump won was because the country is radically and fundamentally racist, and he capitalized on that. And what's so amazing about that is there are literally millions of voters, in excess of 10 million, depending on how you count, but definitely in excess of 10 million, voters who twice voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 12, and then in 2016 voted for Donald Trump. There are increasing numbers of non-white voters all over the country moving to the Republican Party under Trump and voting increasingly for Trump. He had a larger share of black voters, Latino voters, Asian American voters than any Republican candidate in decades, and those trends are only worsening. And so you have this media that has no interest in and no ability to understand how the majority of people in the United States live, because their lives are completely separate, lived in these isolated enclaves in this kind of liberal bubble. And just today there was this amazing article by Rolling Stone. It was about what most of you have probably heard, which was this horrific mass murder in Buffalo, where an 18-year-old white kid feeding on this kind of ideology of racial hatred that has become fringe but very dangerous around the West, went into a store that he knew was predominantly black and shot as many people as he could, killing 10 of them. And then the article by Rolling Stone that was published this morning was, he is not a lone wolf shooter, he is a mainstream Republican. So I think all of you should be very careful, because you're currently in a country where half of the people in this country apparently are psychotic Nazis on the verge of like some sort of mass murder outbreak, including huge numbers of non-white Americans who are supporters of the Republican Party. And the more you kind of immerse yourself in in a set of institutional beliefs and a kind of ethos of your enclave, just constantly hearing a belief reinforced and reinforced, the more you believe it, the more you're immersed in it, the more immune you become to facts that negate it. And so that's the reason why the media is so incurious, because they've embraced this narrative that the only reason anyone would vote for Republicans, the only reason anyone would vote for Trump, is because they're racist or they're fascists or they're white supremacists. And it's left them completely unable to grapple with things like 10 million people voting twice for Obama and then for Trump, or the fact, as Matt alluded to, there were all kinds of people in 2016 who, if you asked them, they would say, yeah, I have two favorite candidates this year. And you'd say, who are they? And they would say, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. To a working journalist, most working journalists or pundits or political operatives, that makes no sense. They can't comprehend that, because they see the world through this traditional left-right prism that for increasing sections of the country, I would argue a majority, is no longer applicable, is no longer how they see the world. And this is so dangerous when you have this radical breach between the opinion-making journalistic class and elite class on the one hand, and most of the population on the other. They just live completely different lives, work with a completely set of beliefs about the world, have completely different sets of interests. And if you look at countries throughout history where that has happened, where there's been this complete divergence between the people who hold power in the country and the rest of the country over whom they exercise that power, instability at best, and usually much worse things inevitably arise. And I really think that's the point that we're at.
Just quickly to piggyback on that, one of the big stories that went uncovered and continues to go uncovered is the transformation of the Democratic electorate. The last time I looked at this, 41 of the richest 50 congressional districts in America had Democrats in those seats, and all of the top 10 richest districts were won by Democrats. Whereas as recently as 1992, the split was more like 50-50. If you live in an affluent suburb, the overwhelming majority of the voters are going to be Democrats now. And the big divide in American politics is no longer about ideology, it's significantly about income and even more education. It's a split between people who have high school degrees or less, and people who are college educated. And this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump was so effusive in saying, I love the poorly educated, because they vote for him. But this is another taboo subject. Nobody likes to talk about this because it speaks to a transformation that happened in the Democratic Party that began, I think, with Clinton, when they went away from relying on unions for financial support. The DLC's big strategic idea was, let's be more competitive on the fundraising front by being more pro-business or pro-growth. That was the term that they used a lot. And a couple of decades later, what you end up with is a party that no longer has any real organic connection to working people of any kind. And so, I think that's a massive factor in all of this, is that the reporting on class politics has become taboo. All you have to do is go to a Donald Trump event, and you can see it clearly that the composition of the crowds is vastly different from what you see at a Democratic event. And that's one of the reasons why they hated the media, because they saw us as upper class representatives of the coastal elite who all live in New York, LA, and Washington, which is true for the most part. And it got increasingly hostile as time went on, and that's why Trump was scoring so many points going after us, because we were symbols of the upper class. And that's another reason why I think the divide is no longer neatly between left and right anymore. It has a lot more to do with class than it ever did before.